we're missing somebody.
We're missing Angie, also, and if we can. Angie's putting her phone number on the front door because the front door is locked. So just in case someone decides to join the meeting.
That's
Yeah.
And Fred Knapp,
Fred not here.
not here.
Busy.
And of course, Ken, the life of the
Ken,
party.
yeah, Ken is his normal 10-15 minute.
Yeah. It's anything, he's consistent if nothing else, right?
I've been in meetings and him and I are in a breakfast club, business breakfast club together.
Yeah.
And you can set your clock.
10 minutes late.
7:30, the meeting starts and he'll be there about 7:45.
Well, he's busy too.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I know that. There he is.
Oh,
Got some seats left.
And sir, we have
Morning, kid.
sign it over there whenever you get a chance. Thank you.
Hey, Morning, Rich.
hey, Bob. How you doing? Good.
Do we know if Fred is not coming or coming? He is not.
He's not,
Okay, so we're good with Ken.
yes.
All right.
We start. I'm assuming you heard.
Jim?
Yeah.
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 Yep.
You heard about Jim, right?
Yeah,
Jim Calvin.
yeah,
Yeah.
So he was flying a plane and crashed at the top of Picacho Peak.
Oh, gee.
Passed away.
Saturday. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, he flies an ultralight. He's been doing that for, gosh, 15+ years.
He's the guy that I see flying around that. up in that area.
It's a blue, yeah, it's blue wing.
Oh, okay.
And blue tail. Yeah, he flies up that way a lot.
And you said Jim.
Jim Galvin.
Galvin.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I saw the TV news on Sunday and they reported it and had his name on it, but it was,
Right.
it wasn't quite spelled right. And could that be him?
right.
And
Okay.
I didn't know for sure till I got a call from, well, Charles, with Post Piper.
Yeah.
He said that it happened.
Okay.
They didn't have to be let in actually,
Okay,
for whatever reason.
Technology good?
yes.
Are we ready to call the order? All right, let's call the meeting to order. Angie?
It is 9:05 a.m. Tuesday, June 11th, 2024. Roll call. Brent Woods,
Here.
Rick Bright,
Here.
Dennis Kuhn,
Here.
Fred. Ken Cawthorn,
Here.
Thomas Hayes.
Here.
We have quorum.
Okay. Let's jump into item 2, International Building Code. So we previously had the comparison. Now we have 9 through 33, the first two. So we just started getting those. I guess let's jump back to chapters 1 through 8. Is there any other continuing discussions on items chapters 1 through 8 that you've run across, anybody?
Yes.
Okay.
This is Ken Cawthorn. So in chapter 7, we need to do the same modifications we did in the IMC. And so those would be in sections 717.6.1, exception 1, we need to have the same note added as we did in the IMC section 607.6.1. Which is basically just that exception saying that the duct shall be located within the wall cavity or fire rated assembly. Is what we're adding, just that simple statement, or fire rated assembly. And that way the two of those match, because they're the exact same text.
Mhm.
They just literally copied it verbatim. And then in section, the next page, 717.6.2.1.2, we need to add exceptions 4 and 5, which are the exact same exceptions we added in the IMC section 607.6.2.1.2. And that was about having the interlocked with the smoke detector. Okay.
Anything else on chapters 1 through 8?
No, the only thing I noticed, they have new definitions.
Right.
And then they have some new requirements. That's kind of surprisingly, they're just now getting into this code. Because they're technological
Yep.
changes and.
Yep.
So I don't know if the verbiage is correct. Just have to put it out there and then see what happens. So. Okay. So I know.
Yeah, and I'm still looking through the change of occupancy and the impact on the existing building, structural stuff.
Yeah, that's one of
specifically.
those things where they rewrote it. So what does that mean when it actually gets applied? Specific project?
Right, plus it's fairly vague on
Yeah,
the additional occupant load. You know, there wasn't anything quantifiable in the increase in occupancy. So like we're saying, yes, last time it's like if it was one, B occupancy with one user, but you're gonna put somebody else in there that's got more people, does that throw you into a change of occupancy and then all the especially the existing building code requirements for that when you have a change of occupancy.
Yeah, which falls under, all that falls under the existing building code, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right. So that kicks in a lot of stuff.
Yeah, but not as much as meeting all the requirements of the IBC for the new for that new occupancy. Yeah, it gives you some option, or not options, but some leeway, I guess.
Right. Yeah, so I just think we need to be careful as we go through the other codes.
well, I'm not, it gets confusing because when somebody says, does this comply with handicap code? Well, what are we talking? Are we talking the Fair Housing Act? I mean, there's like 5 different handicap codes. And so the rule that we've always used for the ADA is the 20% rule on a remodel. You have to spend up to 20% of your construction budget. So, but when it comes to a change of occupancy where you have more people, we've had to adjust the outside air count and the AC to account for the additional people. And then it's been 20% rule for the handicap upgrade. So I would assume the 20% rule would still apply. I don't know what our building officials think.
Yes, it does. The 20% requirement for modifications to existing buildings still applies. And in reference to which code the city of Tucson would apply for handicap accessibility, it is the ICC A117.1 as referenced in the IBC. So the ADA and the ADAG are not specifically adopted by the city of Tucson or Pima County. So they are enforceable through the Justice Department, but not by the city of Tucson.
Okay,
All right.
so basically it's the 20% rule. It doesn't matter whether the occupant load has increased or not. It's still 20% on the ADA requirement.
My caveat to that, I would like to make sure that we're all on the same page. That is, if there is a change of occupancy, the change of occupancy would be required to meet all the provisions for the new occupancy.
So for example, if you increase the occupancy and you went from one exit required to two, the second exit would have to be handicap accessible.
And also, I believe there is a specific criteria for elements on the accessible route for the primary. Drawing a blank on the specific language, but it is the primary use of the building, primary function
Right,
on the accessible route.
would the 20% still apply regardless?
So, yes, unless it is a change of occupancy. So if, for example, you are a B occupancy and you're increasing the occupant load, that is not a change of occupancy, it's a change of intensity within the same occupancy.
Right.
But if you're going from a B to an A, for example, let's say you're changing a strip mall space into a bar, it is a change of occupancy and it would need to meet all of the criteria for the new occupancy.
Per the building code.
For the existing building code, there is a
Okay.
separate chapter in the International Existing Building Code dedicated to change of occupancy. And you would need to meet all of the criteria for that chapter.
Okay,
Just want to clarify that the existing building code is applied differently if you're maintaining the same use of the building as opposed to changing the use of the building. It's separate chapters in the IPBC.
so what we have to be careful of is the ADA is 20%. It doesn't address change of use, increase occupancy, it's 20% of your construction budget. Which is generally the rule, except you may get a situation where the building code requires additional improvements beyond the 20%.
The 20% is assuming that you're staying the same occupancy.
Well, what I'm saying is the ADA does not say it's a change of occupancy or it's not a change of occupancy. The building code addresses that. The ADA federal requirement says you're doing a renovation, it's 20% of your construction budget.
I can't speak to the ADA.
Okay, but that's, it doesn't get into the building code, change of occupancy increase. Doesn't get into that. So you may have a situation where you need to go over the 20% if something in the building code triggers additional handicap requirement.
That is true.
So, and I'm assuming the way it would be applied is be prioritized. So obviously you want exit pathways accessible, but there may be some other requirements that aren't as critical, but that aren't really life safety issues.
Well, I believe the ADA is beyond the scope of this committee.
No, but as an architect trying to apply these, the 20% has generally always been the rule.
Change of occupancy, Clayton was speaking about in International Existing Building Code is chapter 10.
Yeah. Well, the whole problem with the handicap access is not what the specific requirement is, it's always the scoping requirements. What's the scope of what you have to do? Once you figure out the scope, the technical stuff is fairly easy.
Right.
That's always a big question mark, always up for debate.
So let's move on to chapter 933. We just got these what, a couple days ago. So I know we haven't really had much of a chance. I'm gonna throw out one of my favorite wording issues as I started going through this. In section 1512.2 talks about roof replacement. It's really roofing replacement. Because there is such confusion over that issue sometimes. You know, you get a call
Really?
that somebody, the roof blew off. You know, their roofing blew off. So We're not talking about roof replacements, we're talking about roofing. So that section should really be updated with roofing requirements. And I've started looking at structural sections and also relates to ASC 7. So again, we just got this thing. So I mean, has anybody had a chance to come up with anything yet? Okay, so we're just gonna continue that one for the next time. Yeah.
No.
Okay. Pull forward. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so on to item 3, International Existing Building Code. So what do we have on that for today?
No, I didn't prepare anything on a new list of existing building code.
Okay,
I did do the swimming. pool.
Right, I saw that.
Swimming pools
Right.
as well.
okay. So we really have nothing on that to discuss today, but just those on the committee should really start looking into that. Especially, you know, I want to look at it with that change of occupancy issue and make sure that we're not doing something crazy.
I think we're gonna have the same problem as to change the verbiage.
Right.
And then when you apply that verbiage to a specific project, how does it wash out? So
And the trick is knowing that up front, you know, because it's not what that increase is. It's just kind of left rather vague as when the level of activity, which is not real definable. So,
well, I think you'd have to go by occupant load. I don't know what our building officials think. But you can have a B occupancy where the occupant load goes up dramatically.
right, but if it goes up 10%, does this kick in? You know, the requirements for change of occupancy. There's nothing,
Well, to me, it's an exiting. The primary thing is life safety. So you want to have accessible exits. So if you need a second exit, you have to make that accessible.
right, but there are certain times with the change of occupancy where you have to end up doing like a lateral analysis on an existing building because of change of occupancy. And that can be a big,
If it goes to a more hazardous occupancy.
Yep.
Right,
which is more people, more activity.
a change in occupancy.
Right, so that's something that I'm gonna be looking into more closely.
I wish I had that foresight to look at, see what the implication of the specific verbiage is gonna be
Right,
on a specific project.
Right.
I mean, that's why we revise the code every 3 years. We put something out there. And then the verbiage doesn't work in certain situations, so we have to go back and revise it.
right. And it's always like you're saying, it's life safety. It's, you know, the exiting, getting more people out, but also it's the lateral, you know, lateral stability is important because you start putting a bunch more people in a building, you know, much more lives to deal with. So, and they did change some of the verbiage as far as risk category.
Mhm.
This is in table 1604, which is the risk category they use for factors, seismic factors.
Mhm.
They've changed the verbiage
Okay,
with this new chapter 9 thing. So
so
it's
does the verbiage change the meaning?
no, it helps define like what risk category 3 is. 2 is your normal office building,
Right,
but 3 has large assembly type rooms, and schools would be an obvious one. So I don't think that the definitions they've done have really been more of a burden. It's just clarification definitions. It makes it easier to know that whether you really are in three or not. And again, it's a lot of people.
yeah, it's a classic problem, we're writing a code section, and then when it gets applied, there are issues, and you have to
Right.
fix it, and then there are other issues, and you gotta fix it, so.
Right.
I don't know that those revisions have significantly changed any of those categories, but.
No, no, Clayton,
I just want to point out on the 20% discussion
Uh-huh.
for the existing building code, that section was expanded slightly to include a little bit more language, so definitely encourage you to take a look at the existing building code, section 306.7.1, where it highlights the 20% rule. And specifically, it says the cumulative cost of providing accessible route, toilet facilities, and drinking fountains are not required to exceed 20% of the cost of the alterations affecting the area of primary function.
great, thank you. Okay, so let's just move on to item 4. Is there anything else on that? Existing for now? Obviously, that's a code that I think we all need to look at a little more closely. The International Swimming Pool and Spa Code. Dan Clayton went through that, sent us their markups. Is there any discussion on it? I didn't see anything of any interest.
Well, the only issue I have is splash pads.
Mhm.
And well, we did one like 8 years ago, had to submit it to the health department. And the health department required a variance because we had equipment and the splash pad. And you can't-
So before we go too
So
far
there's
on
a-
this, I think we need to realize what this code actually applies to.
Well, what I'm
Because
saying is
it's not even governing public pools and public.
it governs public and semi.
No, not the internet.
You have to read the amendments that are proposed.
Right.
Facility, which the splash pads would fall under, unfortunately, that code is so old, there's nothing that really justify or covers splash pad. But I don't think we've been requiring a variance since we started doing it.
No, you haven't. And, it's gone from the health department review where they don't really review it. For the building department. And there doesn't seem to be any comprehensive set of rules for splash pads.
The health department has always said they were gonna write something.
And the argument is you don't have enough water in the splash pad to qualify as a pool. Yeah, so. It's always a bureaucratic nightmare trying to. That process. I heard that 8 years ago.
Yeah, we're not holding our breath. Okay. But anything else on the pool and spa code?
Wasn't there something about and I noticed you wrote something, Dan, about in your email about and I just didn't get a chance to look into it, because there was that whole requirement about not being allowed to discharge the backwash, or you had to do it, but at a slower rate, 15 GPM. Is that still there, or,
That's an RWRD requirement.
right?
And I did finally get a hold of them and they sent that to me yesterday.
Okay,
I can.
and that's still a requirement?
Yeah.
Okay.
Lorenzo sent it to me, Lorenzo Hernandez. sent it
Mhm.
to me. This was from June 30th, 20. That's when it expired. So this was effective date July 1, 2023. Drain volume should be no greater than 15 gallons per minute.
Okay, so they still have to backwash to a tank that then discharges at that maximum rate. So-
RWRD, if you're discharging.
Sewer, so should that be in these amendments, or to make it more clear?
Yeah, we definitely have that. What I couldn't find in our 2018 amendments, we had, where was, discharged in accordance with Pima County's Department of Environmental Quality swimming pool spa discharge guideline. That does not seem to exist anymore, so I'd have to go to RWRD's, but.
Okay,
And then I know Clayton, I just copied what Clayton had since they got rid of PDQ. Clayton's comes, everything in red came from Clayton with the city. I thought we would, try to be consistent. What I could do, Ken, is in, the filter backwash requirements.
right.
Water may be discharged in the public sewer and that could have to do.
All right. Cause I also don't see that in. Is that in the city? No, I don't see that in the 15 GPM in the city one either.
It's probably not, because I haven't read.
Right, right. Okay,
I will email all of you guys this stuff.
Just one comment, this is Clayton, for the record. I would offer a little bit of caution to duplicating any code criteria in more than one standard. So if there's a standard in RWRD's criteria that specifies a limit, duplicating that limit in another code would require that both codes then are continuously monitored moving forward to make sure that one change in one isn't impacting the other. I prefer to always make reference to another standard. So if there's a standard in stormwater water criteria or RWRD criteria, I would prefer to point to that standard. That way there isn't the potential for an inconsistency if one changes and the other doesn't. But that again is just a recommendation.
yeah, and I guess I agree with that, so long as that standard's easy to find, right? You're not having to, spend hours trying to find it. And I don't know if that RWRD is locatable easily, so.
I will try to find out.
Right.
It's a guidance letter GL 0027 for swimming pool water discharge.
Okay.
Well, if we're gonna reference it, we should make it available.
Yeah.
On the website where our.
We could link to it, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and if that link gets changed or something, I think that'd be a way to do that.
Yep. Make
I
it-
like-
make
I
it
like
easy
that.
for people, 'cause-
That's probably the best way to do it.
Yep.
Okay.
Good point. Okay.
This
Moving
is
on.
Dennis. I have
Oh,
a
Dennis, sorry.
question. So about applicability of this entire pool and spa code.
Okay.
So it's only applicable to residential. But what does residential mean? Is it every R occupancy?
No, it's single family home pool, for lack of a better word, a single residence.
So it only
If it
applied
was
to a,
Yeah, it only applied to my home pool.
only to a single family residence.
I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe the terminology is a private.
Private,
Pool,
that is correct.
And so it would be exclusive to a single residence. As opposed to a semi-public pool, which would be like an apartment complex where there's.
And a
Or neighbor-
duplex
Or
or,
a neighborhood pool?
A neighborhood pool would be considered a public pool.
Okay,
And both public pools and semi-public pools are regulated by the state. KRS.
interesting.
and so if you had like a residence with an ADU and a single pool, it would still apply there,
Still be
Correct. Yeah.
regardless of how the ADU is being rented, let's say.
That's how I would see it.
If it's a duplex with a shared pool, it's private. The triplex with the shared pool, it's what? Semi-public?
It's a good question. We can definitely look for clarity on that. I know that there's also some legislation underway as it relates to the scope of what can be done under residential, how many dwellings might apply. Those requirements, I believe, are the missing middle housing bill that was recently signed by Governor Hobbs that takes effect January 2026. So there is a little bit of time on those definitions of residential, which are kind of blurring the lines in there for 3 and 4 family dwellings, whether or not those would still apply under the residential code
And you guys have to write some rules for that.
by January 2026.
Okay.
So, yeah, so Rick, when you read the definition of a residential swimming pool in the international swimming pool spa code, it says a pool intended for use that is accessory to a residential setting and available only to the household and its guests. Other pools shall be considered a public pool. For the purposes of this code.
So a house with an ADU would be a public pool.
No, I
No?
think if we are in a condition where there are 3 or more dwellings on the property,
Okay.
it might be considered a semi-public pool. But it would only be a public pool if it were actually open to the public, like a community pool.
Okay.
So somehow we need to probably work on getting that definition of where one stops, and the other one starts.
Well, I don't know if we do. I'm just questioning if
No,
the word residential is good enough or whether it does need to be
It's
more.
gonna come up at some point, so it may as well get.
And either other
Right.
residential occupancy like group homes and things like that, are they might not be public, but is it in the spirit of a household swimming pool? I don't know.
Well, if you have a duplex, don't you have 2 households? Which means it's not private anymore.
It would seem that way, wouldn't it?
So, yeah, if we could, Clayton, maybe look into getting those, that definition defined a little tighter, or maybe draw a line, you know, on this side of the line or that side.
Agreed. And, the city will definitely look into that. I will say that we'll rely pretty heavily on the state.
Right.
Since we can't.
Right.
Easily change the state criteria of semi-public pools. So we're gonna be reliant on where that threshold begins.
And plus,
If that's defined there, we don't need to do anything, I would say.
I think it is. I'm going to look right now.
plus when you take into account what's gonna happen in January 26th. You know, yes,
I guess location would also, if it's a duplex, it's in a single yard, it's fenced off, location makes it a single private pool.
right,
Now, if he lets his neighbor come in,
that's a
that's his
guess,
fault, not ours.
yeah, it's a
Well,
guess,
it is a guess.
right,
That's a guest, yeah.
so that's covered. Okay. Anything else on swimming pool and spa? Moving on to the International Residential Code. It's on the list, but
Chapter 11 still has not been published.
still missing some.
Still hasn't been published.
Holy cow.
And same with the IECC. Still hasn't been published.
That's the last time we put it on chapter, it's just 2 pages.
So,
I thought they agreed to it and they were done with it, but I don't know. Takes a while, I guess.
do we have any anticipated timeline on that?
I thought June or July was what I had heard. So
I
it sounds like it's July.
heard, May or June. Tough to say. And for the record, as of this morning, it still has not been released.
Right.
So we still don't have the Energy Conservation Code or Chapter 11 in the IRC.
Right.
Published as of.
And
this
is it
morning.
even online yet?
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay, well,
makes it easy.
we know where that one stands for, just, okay,
We could probably refer back to the state's definition of a private residential swimming pool. It means a swimming pool at a private residence only used by the owners, members of the owner's family and invited guests, or a swimming pool that serves a housing group consisting of no more than 3 living units.
There we go. Okay,
Well, that makes sense.
and that's the state.
That's the state definition.
Okay, so again, we should probably
Reference that.
have that reference in there and just let that,
Right.
let that cover it.
It's getting too complicated.
No, I mean,
Reference here, reference here.
no, I mean, it's all over this book. I mean, everything is by an adopted standard. It's not in this book.
If you had a book for every reference standard, you'd have to have your own library.
Well, yeah. I have a small one. Okay, so we'll just bypass number 6 since that code is not available. And we'll jump to number 7, which is NEC. Oh, in the back.
Oh, on number 7, there have been some changes in sections that have been moved around,
Okay,
letting everybody know that the 26 is the start of a restructuring. By the 29 code, you will not recognize the NEC. It is going to be completely restructured. So there may be a problem of skipping the 26 cycle because the 29 will not reflect at all to the 23 or the 26.
They're gonna be
In
better
trying to find the codes.
It's gonna be better organized.
According to the NEC, it will be. I've seen a preview of it, and it is definitely moving everything around, then trying to find all the different stuff in there. They will be totally different sections. It will be completely different than the 26. And the 23, the 26 has started some of the restructuring.
It's like going from the
Well-
UBC to the IBC.
Perhaps. I mean, one can argue that perhaps it's necessary with the NEC, as complicated as it is, and it's essentially in the same format that it was since well, almost the beginning of time. The oldest code books I have go back to the 1940s, and it's essentially the same.
Yeah.
They did a renumbering scheme, I believe, in 1959, and from 59 forward, it's essentially the same code structure and format. But the 1959 code is a book that's this tall and this wide and that thick with bigger type than the present code, which has got,
Bigger and,
so much more in it.
yeah.
There's been hundreds of revisions from 2023 back to 2020 and then to the 2017 before that. So there's substantial revisions, but we only had a few local amendments. And right now, I mean, I'm studying those, but I'm not prepared to offer what to do with them at this point. I'm thinking in terms of one thing I would like to quantify would be the outdoor ambient temperature, because my experience has been that that's widely ignored in preparation of electrical systems. And part of that may be that there just isn't anything firm in the code and guidance on exterior temperatures. So I'm looking into what that might be.
Okay. Yeah, it's definitely an issue. Okay. So I guess it's time for a call the audience. Oh, I'm
before we-
sorry. Oh,
Before we do, I just wanted to update.
yeah,
I
sure.
have been doing more research on this whole new refrigerant. And it seems that the ASHRAE standard 15 is kind of vaguely written some things that give a lot of relief. Also, the EPA is providing more relief. And so what the EPA is doing is saying, yes, you can't manufacture in the US any equipment that's using the current R410A. However, will allow you to replace that equipment so long as it's not replacing they made it a strange set. You can't replace the condenser and the fan coil at the same time.
Right.
So you could, because so you could still order a condensing unit, a split. So that's what they're doing to try to relieve this whole issue, a lot of these issues of using now a higher flammability
Right.
refrigerant. So that's something that I'm still trying to determine if that is how the manufacturers are going to do it. So the vendors are going to have to order that from the manufacturer who's going to purchase it in another country and ship it here. So that's what they're doing. Then as far as the whole thing with the shafts and the fire rating, ASHRAE came out with this exception for the shaft where they say the piping, there's a shaft alternate where the piping is not required to be in a shaft so long as it does not pass through any occupied spaces. So they're saying, well, if so long as it's in a wall cavity or in a wall or in a ceiling cavity, that's not an occupied space. So we're trying to get that definition for them to write that interpretation out. So we've submitted that to the ASHRAE for that clarification, because they're saying so long as it's in that wall cavity, then it's not in an occupied space, and therefore it's not required to be in a shaft unless the IBC requires it to be in a shaft, is what they're saying. And if the IBC requires it to be in the shaft, then it has all these triggers that kick in. So there is a lot of relief coming for those directions, which would make things a lot more feasible, especially with existing systems.
So the question is, if there's one above this lane.
Lay and ceiling is what everybody's asking, yes. So that is probably within the occupied space. I would assume it is, but I need to get that, we're trying to get that clarified.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious, why would you assume that? Not occupied.
Only because it's
That's very air permeable. I mean,
Yeah.
it just- It's.
I mean, right?
Yeah.
Especially if
It
it's a return,
breathes in
and
this
what if it's a
room.
return air plenum too?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And,
definitely
you know,
an Issue.
so I don't know. So those are things we're trying to get clarified.
Okay.
So,
That's good. Help,
So,
but
but that's at the ASHRAE level. That doesn't change what the IMC.
correct. So then what we would do is we would refer in those IMC sections to these ASHRAE standards, is what I would recommend we would do.
As a local ordinance,
Yes.
because we don't expect that the International Code Council is gonna do any amendment or anything on their own.
Yeah, it will not happen till the 2027 code. So, because they don't have continuous maintenance on their
I see.
codes. So what they've got in the 2024 code, it matches about the 2019 ASHRAE standard. And so ASHRAE has continuous upgrades. In fact, this is the 2022, and I just printed out a few of the updates that they do on a monthly basis, which is, every month they have more updates. So anyways, but that's kind of where that's at.
So I'm assuming road officials can pipe in that the ASHRAE could be a basis for an appeal. So if ASHRAE makes further,
I don't even think it's an appeal, because we say in IMC, so long as you're using an alternate, we give them an alternate
alternate method.
right?
So an appeal is required most often for an alternative method or material. However, there is flexibility as it relates to your design. If you're designing according to an approved standard, and in this case, if you're designing according to ASHRAE, the city of Tucson would support that. And as a point of clarification, the 2027 IMC amendments have already begun. So even changes that are being made now in ASHRAE wouldn't actually be proposed until the 2030 IMC. Because the 2027 cycle has already started.
Right. Yeah, and these are ongoing because it's also what the EPA, and realize nowhere in the IMC does it say you shall not install a R410A. That is an EPA requirement, and that's what's forcing these other refrigerants to come in, which trigger things in the code. So EPA is giving some relief by allowing manufacturers to still produce R410A or ship R410A, but they have to ship it from other countries.
Can't be manufactured.
Can't be manufactured in the US.
I would have thought that the US companies would have been very opposed to this.
Well, but all the US companies have manufacturing.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're in
Most of
Mexico,
them have
right?
moved
They're
to
across the
Mexico.
border. Yeah. So
True, so there's probably not as.
they don't
much
care.
resistance
Yeah.
As there used to be.
That's why EPA is
Mhm.
picking this industry to go green, right?
So say we pursue this thing as you're suggesting, Ken, that someone could cite the ASHRAE standards as the basis of design. So for a new project being designed, you could cite that. But what about the other side, which is old equipment and old buildings, and a contractor just wants to go pull a permit because they've got a 30-year-old system that they want to
We're
rip
gonna
out?
have to use this gentleman with
So,
a stamp,
and-
with a stamped,
Yeah,
drawing.
so we've now
Which-
increased the cost
Right.
to do the project.
well, but I mean, in my view, in that commercial application and something like that, it really should go through a registered engineer.
And you kind of already have to, because most jurisdictions are requiring you to submit calcs.
Right. They
So,
allow you to do it residentially without a registered engineer.
right,
But everything commercially has to have a registrar, engineer to perform that work and submit for permit.
So it's not, you don't believe it'll have an impact too much on,
No,
I don't think so either.
I don't.
That's assuming the
Yeah.
BTR continues.
point.
The board technical
Might not be any-
registration.
Oh,
may or
right, yeah,
may or
that
may not
happens,
exist Anymore.
Oh, really?
That happens
Oh, that's
by what
right, I've
date?
seen that.
It's pretty quick,
like this
Don't
week,
laugh,
wasn't
Going
it?
after you guys too.
Oh,
so.
Yeah,
yeah, so that's.
There might not be any
registrar's
registrars.
office.
yeah,
The
Yeah.
board technical registration
may disappear.
may disappear.
And didn't I see something where there were like, absolutely must be that way for commercial and not so much residential? I didn't quite understand all of that.
Yeah, it's,
That's
It's a
not, that's not a good situation.
Right.
I've already sent a few letters.
so. Okay, anything else, and call to the audience?
Oh, were we gonna discuss that marijuana
Oh, yeah.
ventilation
sent-
issue?
Yeah, so
Dan sent some in.
I did go through that, and the problem I see is it's still really vague. It doesn't really say what to do. It just says
Right.
that they're, you need to have setbacks, which we already have, and it says if there's complaints, they need to do something about it. So anyways, I think what I like about what was written was it was pretty black and white on what to keep the building negative, and so no odors trying to keep the odors within the space, and trying to keep it there. And so that was the intent of it. But yeah,
On that note also, I'm hoping the end of July, beginning of August, to have a one-day class, and I have a gentleman who does do at least the electrical marijuana facilities. So that'll be something that'll be sent out, and just a heads up that we're gonna try and do some training, because it is becoming more prevalent
Right.
in there.
I mean,
That'll be electrical.
yeah, because I mean, as far as the odors go, though, I mean, if we just leave it that you shall provide odor mitigation, it leaves it up to whoever's submitting, and then up to you guys as far as what that odor mitigation is. It's really vague, right? So
Extremely vague and,
hard to enforce, I imagine,
almost impossible.
right?
All I can do is say, show what mitigation you have.
And it could be-
Take care of, addressing what zoning, as all exhausts have to be mitigated. And that's about it.
Right.
You have a maintenance, protocol.
Right. Could be, we use one of those plugins and that's my odor mitigation, right? Air fresheners.
With the Burger King, they're required to put on, I'm gonna call it a scrubber or something.
Yeah.
Why could not that be
That's,
something similar? I don't know what they.
and that's what I was trying to define, was just define what that is.
That came out of zoning.
Alright.
That wasn't a mechanical code, it was zoning. Not part of this group, but that's one way it was made.
And this could be in zoning too, if it makes it, we just need something that describes, because I know friends of mine do have houses that are, several hundred feet from these dispensaries, and they say if the wind's right, it is very strong odor. So.
I like what that Ted Kuntz did with the Oregon deal. I think it was a little more descriptive, what you used in the amendments.
Right.
Versus Steve Thomas's book, which is kind of an overview.
Right, they're just overviews, and they're just saying you shall provide some, and we did say, this is one way. You can use phase changing filters and other items like that, ionization type stuff, and that's all acceptable. But just do something rather than just say, yeah, we've mitigated it by discharging it at 10 feet or something, right?
Right, and I think what Denver was doing for zoning related.
Right, exactly. So I think we could put something like that into the zoning requirement, or we could keep it in the IMC. Either one.
Well, my thought is keeping it in the IMC, how you proposed it.
Yeah. I mean, that's where most mechanicals will find it, right? We won't look in the zoning.
Note in the 23, there is a brand new section, Article 512, cannabis oil equipment and cannabis oil systems using flammable material. And some of it is putting it into classified as hazardous locations.
Yeah, that's for what is it called? Extraction. Yeah, that is a totally different section that falls into an F occupancy, or an H occupancy rather, and yeah, there's a whole section on that. But that's completely separate than just a growing facility or a baking facility or a dispensary. All those all have strong odors that I'm sure you guys hear the complaints of. So
Two that come to mind are Tito and Peps and Pollo Loco. So we've had complaints on wood-fired ovens or I believe Black Rock Coffee for
coffee? They complain about the coffee.
It's not the brewing, it's the roasting.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the coffee roasters.
Yeah, that was just over here, wasn't it?
Right.
Or was it? Yeah.
So the difficulty is that odors are subjective. And so it's going to be difficult to create a standard that would meet everyone's sense of acceptable aroma.
Right.
But the point of at what point or what level of filtration is required through carbon filters or any number of methods, we would point to regulations that are adopted elsewhere.
So how does that work? You have a facility and the neighbors complain. Where does that get directed to? Zoning?
DEQ.
The DEQ.
Goes to DEQ first for
Okay.
air quality, because they need to have the first pass on if there's an air quality infraction.
But they don't really deal with odors, right?
They do.
They do.
Is it measurable?
Good question, still subjective.
How do you measure?
There are calibrated nostrils.
I know a few of those people.
Denver developed that, what they call it, smell meter.
Smellometer.
Like telescopic building.
This sounds like a Dr. Seuss thing, doesn't it?
I actually looked it up.
That's pretty funny.
Well, that does seem a little problematic and where to put the regulation, enforcement.
But I think I read an article in, I think it was City of Phoenix, they had to go after, I don't know if they were growing or what they were doing. They went in and made them reseal all their doors. You know, there's some other measures that were taken to help mitigate smells. And I don't know if that was under the zoning code or building code, but you know, there's gotta be case scenarios recently with what jurisdictions are doing. Dan, what was the article that you shared? You shared an article or something?
I'm sorry, Ron, I got.
It was on cannabis odors in both Denver and Oregon.
Was it, is that on this list or was that sent out separately?
I sent it to the code committee.
Andy, can you send those out to the others? I don't, if
Or
it's
just
on the website, I can read it, but you know. It'd be good for the rest of us to see.
Noted.
Good idea, Bob.
I'll see if I can find the one in Phoenix, which is good information.
Yeah, I mean,
That'd be-
because,
that'd be
because
great.
odor mitigation could be just as simple as, hey, we sealed up the building. We caulked all the openings and we provided weather seals at the doors, you know, but I guess I was just trying to define it in a way that keeps the building negative and you then treat any discharge that's coming out. So,
Yeah, the gray area is the treat.
well, that's why I wanted to define it. So we told them it had to be carbon filters and this velocity, maximum velocity across them. And now, whether they're maintaining them, that's another issue, but at least all the infrastructure is there.
We'll start sealing all the doors, too. If you don't have sealed doors.
Right.
You're not gonna have negative pressure.
So
So would you require a blower door test?
didn't require a blow door test, no.
I mean, could that be one of the solutions?
It could be, yeah.
All right, anything else? Yes.
My name is Dan Santa Cruz. I'm the commercial plans examiner for electrical for the city. A while back, you guys were talking about splash pads, and I just wanted to inform some to do their own electrical that there's a new section in there covering splash pads, and it's been a long waiting because I've always had hard. But any splash pads require any electrical equipment pumps. You're not going to have to comply with similar similar rules as for some swimming pool, grounding, geofine protection. I just wanted to had a discussion with Dennis about it not too long ago. It's something that's been a long time needed.
Okay, great, thank you. Anything else, anybody? I guess we're ready to adjourn. Somebody make the motion.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion, those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Adjourn. Next meeting is?
Meeting July 9th.
Who? Who?
Do we know where?
I have so much work, I really.
Here.
I mean,
This-
okay. Need to place on.